Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, we are taking a look at the Dread Knight tank, and this is a starter tank for heavy armor Necromancer tank builds to help you get into tanking when you get there. So this is using just overland drop sets and another set that you can get easily through most guild traders, things like that, and run from running dungeons. But it's just a nice way to start running content. So let's get into it. So as you can see, we are a Red Guard Necromancer for this one. Now, race can and can't matter. I mean, it's up to the player's preference of play and their personal play style on what they like to play. So for this one, I went with Necromancer, and I'll show why later. So looking at our stats, you can see we have 17k max Magica, 37k health, 30k stamina. Our recoveries are not in the greatest, but they're still good enough to get by. Weapon and spell damage, not too bad. Critical's kind of low, but our resistances are really looking good here. 26k and 26k unbuffed. So when we buff up with our resistances, you're going to see we go to 31, 31 on the front bar, and on the back bar we go to 28, 28. So we actually do get a lot of resistances with this setup. Alright, moving on. Moving down here, we do have major or minor toughness and minor vitality at all times. We also have the Lady Mundstone to help boost our resistances, and we are using Tri-Stat Food. And moving on from here, the food we're using is the Longfin Pasty and Melon Sauce. This is a really good food for most tanks to use because it gives you all three resources, but it really depends on the tank build. Tri-Stat Pots, again, depends on the build, but this is a really good one for this particular tank and its playstyle. Don't mean to cough. Moving on to the sets. Now we are using two different sets, 5-piece sets and a 2-piece set from another thing. The two 5-piece sets we are using is the Order of Diagna set. This drops in Alakir Desert, and as you can see, the 2-piece gives you max health, 3-piece max health, 4-piece healing taken, and the 5-piece gain minor vitality at all times, increasing your healing received by 8%. Now, if you didn't know, one of the passives on heavy armor is healing received. So this will give you 16% healing received. So that's a lot of healing received. But we actually have 21% healing received, and it's the way we built the build so it can self-sustain through healing itself. But that's if your healer goes down. If your healer doesn't go down, you never have to worry about it. Moving on. The other set we're using is the Warrior Poet set. Now, this was a set when it came out. It was really misunderstood because at the time we got a class that also gave minor toughness, and we had an ability that gave minor toughness. Now we don't have that ability that gives minor toughness, except for the class, the Warden, can give minor toughness, but they're not in every group. So this is a good starter set to start with, because if there is no Warden in your group, you can use the set. And this set drops in Morrowind or Vardenfell, whatever you want to call it. It drops there, and as you can see, the 2-piece max health, 3-piece spell resistance, 4-piece physical resistance, 5-piece max health, and then the other 5-piece bonus, gain minor toughness at all times, increasing your max health by 10%. So this is a really good combo, these two sets, for a beginner tank, because it gives you a lot of tools that help you stay alive. Gives you resistances, gives you a lot of health, and on top of that it gives you the minor toughness and the minor vitality. Now moving on to how we have the traits and enchants set up on the sets themselves before we get into jewelry and weapons. On the armor, we have 3 tri-stats on the big pieces, and all 3 of these pieces are set to infused traits. Now these are just going to help you boost the amount of resources your enchantments give you. Now moving on to the other ones, we're running 4 sturdy on the shoulders, the gloves, the belt, and the boots. And this is going to allow you to block at a lower cost. So blocking abilities when you first start out, you're going to feel like you need to block everything. But the reality is there's only certain attacks you truly need to block, because the rest of the stuff can be absorbed through your health, because it's not going to do that much damage. And that is the traits, and the enchants on here are 3 tri-stat, like I said, and then the rest are healthy enchants on the smaller pieces. And this is going to give you the greater amount of health pool. Moving on to the other stuff, the jewelry now. The jewelry, we are running 3 Order of Diagonal jewelry, all healthy. And the enchants we have on here are Shield Play enchant. This is going to reduce your block cost and bash cost. And then we have 2 Magic Recovery. This is going to help you sustain your max Magica really well. Not great, but well. Now moving on to the sword and shield. The shield we are using is a sturdy shield with a tri-stat enchant. And the reason we're using a sturdy shield is because, and a tri-stat enchant, is because if you have a healthy enchant on here and you swap bars to the back bar and you don't have something there to compensate for the loss that you're going to have of that 477 health, then there's going to be a major health drop-off. So if you watch when I swap bars, I go from 37,796 to 37,100. So I don't lose that much health when I swap bars. That's why we use the tri-stat on this instead. And we also lose a little bit of Magica and stamina, which doesn't hurt us too bad. Now moving on to the sword. Oh, the set we're using for the weapons, agility. And the reason I chose agility is because the 2-piece bonus gives you more stamina. This helps you sustain better because you have a bigger stamina pool to work with. You are a red guard, so sustaining is not really an issue. The weapon we're using is an absorbed stamina infused weapon. Now, what that means is it's still an agility weapon, but we're using it with an infused trait and an absorbed stamina. This is going to allow us to sustain easier. We're going to be able to get 230 stamina I think it's every 3 seconds with this. And it helps, give us a little bit of damage output. Not much, but enough. On the back bar, we are using a bow with an infused bow with a crusher enchant. This is going to help us sustain the crusher uptime. Now, we are using 1 ability to keep crusher applied, but we can only keep it applied through 1 skill. We can't use like 5 different skills to keep it applied or anything else. It's through the 1 skill that we have on our back bar that we're going to keep it applied. Alright, now let's move on. So, moving on to the skills, guys. First thing you need to know is make sure that you get your class passives, okay? Go through and get all your class passives. You can see I don't have any class skills up here, but that doesn't mean that you can't have class skills unlocked that you utilize for when you're not doing dungeons. Because when you're not doing dungeons, there's no reason to be a tank, to be geared for tanking, or not geared, but set up for tanking in that manner. You can actually use some damage abilities and stuff to help you get through the content easier. So make sure you get all your class passives so you can take advantage of all your class passives. Moving on to the weapon skills now. We do have the sword and shield, so you want to make sure you get all the passives there, and the bow skill passives. Moving on to armor. Now, I do unlock the light and medium because when I level a character, I'm usually wearing, depending on the armor types that I want to master or whatever, I'll usually wear like 5 pieces of medium, 5 light, 1 heavy, 1 medium. So, like, depending on how I have it set up, I always run a 5-1-1 setup so I can level all my armors. So that way, when I do get to the point where I have, like, a monster set or I'm wearing a crafted set mixed with another set, I can actually have the light and medium there to offset. So I get that total balance and I get the total benefit of it. So work on leveling those as you progress and just unlock them so you have them available for when you get those setups. So on the light armor, you want to unlock the top 3 because the bottom 2 pertain to having 5 or more pieces of light armor. Medium armor, same thing, except for there's only one that requires 5 pieces of medium armor, and you don't need improved sneak while you're playing a tank in PvE. So the rest of the abilities are pretty good to have. Heavy armor, because you are using heavy armor, you want to unlock all the passives. All the passives are going to play really well into this. 1, Resolve gives you more resistances for wearing heavy armor. Constitution is going to give you a higher health recovery. It's also going to give you a resource return from magic and stamina when you are hit, when you take damage. So we get 757 resources back every 4 seconds. Juggernaut is going to increase your max health based on the amount of heavy armor you have. Since we're wearing 6 pieces or 7 pieces, we get 14%. And then Revitalize is going to increase your stamina and Magica return of your heavy, fully charged heavy attacks by 25%. So this 25% stacks with the 30% you get base, and that's 55%, or yeah, 55%. Then you have your CP, which can also increase the return. Moving on to Rapid Mending. Now this is where you get that healing received for 5 or more pieces equipped. Increases your healing received by 8%. So we don't, like I said, we get 8% from here and 8% from Vitality. So that's a 16%. And then with CP, we have another 5%. So we go to 21%. Alright, moving on. World Skills, Soul Magic. I like to unlock these two mainly because they really help out. Soul Summons really helps out because it allows you to use a Soul Gem every hour, or to revive yourself while you're in dungeons or trials once every hour without any cost of Soul Gems. Then Soul Lock, killing an enemy with a weapon ability has a 10% chance to automatically fill an empty Soul Gem. So, Dark Brother, we don't need. Fighters Guild. Now, for this build, we're just going with Intimidating Presence and Banish the Wicked. Mages Guild, we're just going with Persuasive Will. Psijic Order, you can unlock, so you can get the Deep Thoughts if you feel you need it. If you're having resource issues. You won't have resource issues with this build, I promise you. Undaunted, Undaunted Command, and Undaunted Metal. These are very, very going to be very important, and you get these by doing the Undaunted dungeons. Undaunted dungeons is pretty much any of the dungeons you can find in the group finder. So if you go in here and you go to specific dungeons, it's any of these dungeons are going to give you Undaunted experience for completing the quests in them. And then if you do the Undaunted dailies, you also get Undaunted experience. But these ones, if you do like Fungal Grotto 1 all the way through to Vaults of Madness, only Vaults of Madness, you will have enough to level your Undaunted level to max. So as long as you go through in order, just go down the line as you're leveling and you're progressing your character to level 50. If you do these in normal, all the way down to here, you can unlock your Undaunted skill line completely. But you do have to get Undaunted, the Undaunted quest. And the Undaunted quest you'll get in the first tavern that you come to in any major city. Most of the time, those Undaunted quests are going to be places like Aradon. It's going to be here in Volkengard. It's going to be at the tavern here, the Salted Wings. In Glenumbra, in Daggerfall, at the Rosy Lion, I believe it is where they're at. And then moving on to the final one, which is in Stone Falls, it will be in Davin's Watch, I believe, and it is in the Watch House, where you get the quest for the Undaunted. I believe. Now, I'm not 100% on that, guys, because usually I play Aldemary Dominion, so, but yeah. And then one, or no, this isn't here, it's down here by the tavern, or down right here, it's the fish stink is where you get the Undaunted quest. And this will help you level that Undaunted skill line through doing dungeons and such. Alright, going back to our skills, passives, moving on to Alliance War. Alliance War skills are only unlocked from doing PvP. Now, there's two ways you can unlock Alliance skills. Doing Battlegrounds, which is really the fastest, and then doing Cyrodiil PvP. Battlegrounds is a lot easier because all you have to do is play the content and you're going to earn AP regardless. And AP is alliance points, which is what's needed to unlock the alliance skill. Racial skills, make sure you fill out all of them, and this is why I chose the red guard for this particular build. Now, you don't have to choose the red guard for this build. You can use any race you want, but I chose this for its passive capabilities and some other stuff. So first off, Wayfarer increases your experience gained from one-handed sword and shield skill lines by 15%. Martial training, reduce the cost of your weapon abilities by 8%, reduces the effectiveness of snares applied to you by 15%. Conditioning increases your max stam by 2,000, and then Adrenaline Rush. When you deal direct damage, you restore 950 stamina. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. So not only am I getting resources back when I take damage, but whenever I deal direct damage, I'm also getting stamina back. This is going to help me sustain really well. Crafting, alchemy, medicinal use. Try to level this as you progress from 1 to 50 or CP 160. Try to have it filled out by the time you hit CP 160. The reason I say that is because at CP 160 you can wear the highest quality gear in the game, the highest level of gear in the game. And all gear then in the game drops to at CP 160. So that means any gear sets you pick up in Overland, Dungeons, Trials, World Bosses, Delves, anywhere, will be CP 160. So making sure you have your medicinal use maxed out really helps with keeping your potions active, so you can keep them up consistently. Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. Now these aren't essential, but I will say this, they are very, very, very important, especially for those people who want to have that extra 20 minutes added to their food, so that way they can have the food last longer while they're doing dungeons, and they're not having to spam their food almost. It kind of feels like that after a while, especially if you're using 1 hour food versus purple 2 hour food or gold 2 hour food. Alright, so that's it for the passives. Now moving on to the skills that we have on our bar. Now remember, the skills we have on the bar are just skills that are used to give us a general layout of our skills. These aren't skills you're going to be using constantly all the time. These are skills that you're going to be, some you're going to swap out and you're going to change out depending on the situation and depending on your group dynamic. So starting with the first skill we do have Ruinous Scythe. Now this is going to be our primary heal that we use for this build because it can heal for a lot. So what the first thing it does is it does damage to enemies, their life force, physical damage, and then every third attack with this ability will set all enemies hit off balance. So that means if you have 5 enemies that you're fighting and you hit all of them 3 times with this ability, it will on the third attack set them off balance, which means they take 10% more damage. Every time you use the ability, you heal for X amount of health for the first enemy hit, and an additional X amount of health for each additional enemy up to 5 times. The healing of this ability scales off your max health. So that's why we're using it, is because it's based off your max health, and we have a lot of max health. The next ability we have on our bar is Pierce Armor. Now this is a morph of Puncture, and this is the first skill you unlock in the Sword and Board skill line. So it's a really good skill to have right out the door, because this is your primary taunt ability. Now when you start out in the game, the only way you can get a taunt as a tank is Sword and Shield and Ice Staff. So having Sword and Shield is basically really just the basic starter way of tanking. But it is a really effective way to tank. It's probably one of the more effective ways. But it doesn't mean that you can't tank with other items. So this does a little bit of damage, and it does your taunt for 15 seconds. Now, this also afflicts the enemy with Major Fracture and Major Breach, reducing their physical and spell resistance by 5,280 by 12 seconds. Now, that part of the skill isn't really necessary. Now, you guys are probably going, but that's the tank's job. It's not the tank's job. It's the group's job to make sure certain things are applied in the group dynamic. For a tank, yes, it's beneficial. For anyone, that's beneficial, applying Major Breach and Major Fracture. because that helps improve your DPS. So with Sword and Shield, if you know you have a tank with you, this is a good skill to have for that purpose, and the taunt. Next ability we have on our bar is Heroic Slash. Now we have this here because it does a lot of damage, to a degree. But it also has a CC on it, which reduces movement speed by 60% for 4 seconds. This applies to any target you hit, except for certain boss targets and certain named targets. This also afflicts the enemy with minor maim, reducing their damage done by 15% for 12 seconds. This is another way to mitigate the incoming damage you take. And since it lasts for 12 seconds, you just have to hit this once, wait, reapply. Now, you gain minor heroism, granting you 1 ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 9 seconds. So it's a really good skill for ultimate gen, for minor maim, and for that physical damage. The next ability we have is our second Necromancer ability, and this is Deaden Pain. Now, what this does is this saps the lingering life from each corpse, granting you 2 ultimate and healing for X amount every 1 second for 2 seconds per corpse consumed. While you have the heal effect, you gain major protection, reducing the damage you take by 30%. This ability scales off your max health, and while slotted, your damage is reduced by 3%. So the reason we have this on the front bar is because this is where Sword and Shield is, and we want to reduce as much incoming damage as we can when we're on the front bar. So having that 3% there and having this do 30% whenever you consume a corpse is going to be really good for you and your group, because it's going to keep you alive. Moving on to the next ability, we have Absorb Magica. Now this one's a really good one to have, especially for starter tanks who don't understand resource management and block management, and like priority blocking versus not priority blocking, because you don't have to block everything. You just have to block priority attacks. And these are things that knock you down, things that stun you, immobilize you, and the really hard-hitting attacks that bosses do. You have to learn those mechanics and time your blocking. Once you get a repetitious muscle memory for it, it becomes natural to when you block and stuff. And once you get repetition for the way you play, blocking and then attacking to get resources back or such is going to become second nature. It's going to become muscle memory, and this skill isn't as necessary. But let's go ahead and go over the skill. So bolster your defense, absorbing up to 21,921 damage from the next spell projectile cast at you, and healing you for 16% of your max health. Now this skill does scale with your max health, just to let you know. So the higher your max health, the stronger the heal, or the stronger the absorb it does. So while you have a shield equipped and this ability slotted, the amount of damage you can block is increased by 8%, and the blocking is reduced by 8%. So you guys know we're wearing 4 pieces of sturdy on the body, 1 sturdy shield. So we actually have 5 pieces. That's 20% block cost reduction. With this is another 8, so that's 28. Then with our our passives and blocking, we get 30%. We actually get a lot of block cost reduction. We get 36%. So we get a lot of block cost reduction, and then along with our CP, we get another 16%. So we have a whole lot of resource management when it comes to blocking. Next ability we have on our bar is our ultimate, and this is Pummeling Goliath. I haven't shown like how this works yet, but I will explain it. So first, you turn into a giant bone Goliath, and it increases your max health by 30,000 for 20 seconds and immediately restores 30,000 health. While transformed, your light attacks restore X amount of health, and your fully charged heavy attacks restore X amount of health. This ability scales off your max health. Now, what it means by this ability, that means just the healing factor of this ability is off your max health. The next thing, when you bash attacks, or your bash attacks can hit multiple targets in front of you, dealing X amount of physical damage. So when you transform and you press block, and then your attack button, you'll bash. You see how I throw the shield out like that? That's a bash attack. So I'm going to show you on this target skeleton. So if I do this and I do that, you see how it says bash? 1015, bash 1015, it says immune to snare, because you do put a small snare on the enemy when you bash. That's if they're not immune to it. So I can sit here and I can bash, as you can see, and it's really good. But when I do it as that Goliath, I actually do it in a cone attack where I hit multiple targets. So it's really good on trash encounters and stuff like that. And in some cases, some boss encounters when they summon ads. Alright, going back in here to the skills, starting with the next bar. On our back bar, we do have a bow weapon. Starting with our first skill, we are using Venom Arrow. Now, Venom Arrow isn't just something that a tank can use. Anyone can use it. The only reason why I use it on the tank is because you shoot an arrow and coated in Shadow Scale poison at an enemy, dealing X amount of poison damage, and X amount of poison damage, and an additional X amount of poison damage over 10 seconds. Now, if the enemy hit is casting an ability, they are interrupted, set off balance, and stunned for 3 seconds. That means you apply 3 negative effects to them, which helps your group do damage against them. So if you see a spellcaster off in the distance getting ready to do something, like say they're down there and you're like, oh, they're casting a spell, boom, you hit that, it's gonna interrupt them, do all that. It's really good. And not just tanks can use this. Damage dealers can use this ability too, to help with group dynamics. Moving on to the next ability we have Bombard. Now Bombard is basically here for the CC effect. So first you fire a burst of arrows in one shot, dealing X amount of damage to enemies in front of you. Now this fires in a cone in front of you, and the enemies affected are immobilized and have their movement speed reduced by 40% for 4 seconds. That's really good. Next ability we have is the Mending Spirit, or Spirit Mender Morph, Spirit Guardian. And this one, you conjure a ghostly spirit to do your bidding and stay by your side for 16 seconds. The spirit heals you or the lowest health ally around you every 2 seconds, restoring 1,078 health. While active, 10% of the damage you take is transferred to the spirit instead. And it creates a corpse on death. So this is going to allow you to utilize that ability on your front bar for the 30% damage reduction. Moving on, the next ability we have is Agony Totem. Now this one's really cool. I love this ability. Summon an effigy of bone at your feet that gives minor protection to you and your allies for 9.5 seconds, reducing the damage taken by 8%. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. So when you cast this, this is what it looks like. You see that really ghostly line circling it? That's a 6-meter range around that totem. Anyone standing within this gets 8% damage reduction while they're in here. And it's a very, very powerful group buff for resources. Alright, moving on to the next skill. And this is one of the greatest skills I think that the Necromancer tank can have, and that is Beckoning Armor. Wrap yourself in Hardened Bode, granting you Major Resolve and Major Ward, increasing your physical and spell resist by 5,280 for 20 seconds. While active, enemies that strike you with ranged attacks will be pulled toward you once every 3 seconds. Creates a corpse when the effect completes. So this is really good for that purpose. It pulls enemies to you, allows you to gather all the enemies up in a group or a ball so you can burn them down quicker. And if you're using Bombard, you can also CC them shortly after they get to you. You got to wait 4 seconds, hit them with Bombard. It keeps them in place better so you can have your group AoE them down. Next ability we have is Aggressive Warhorn. Like I said, this is a skill that comes in the Alliance War skill line. It's not hard to get. It's time consuming. You got to do a lot of PvP to unlock a lot of these skills. But a lot of the skills are beneficial, both the assault and support in PvE. And Aggressive Warhorn is one of them. So this one, sound a Warhorn to rally your forces, increasing you and your allies' max Magica and max stamina by 10% for 30 seconds. You and your allies gain major force, increasing your critical damage by 15% for 9 seconds. Now, it's really good. Now, I want to go back to the Agony Totem because I didn't finish it. And the reason I didn't finish it is because I want to go over this thoroughly. So not only do you give your group 8% damage reduction standing within 6 meters of you, but you also, after 2 seconds, the totem instills fear in enemies, holding them in place for 4 seconds. So you have a lot of CC, crowd control abilities with this build that allow you to control the movement of combat. So this is a really good one to use when you run out. Have your bone armor up, drop this. This way any enemies that walk through this will be immobilized for 4 seconds when the fear goes off. So they can't pass through this circle getting to your allies who are hiding back here attacking from ranged. So that's what you want to do with that. The next thing is allies can activate pure agony, causing enemies to take X amount of magic damage over 5 seconds and applying minor vulnerability to them for the duration, increasing their damage taken by 8%. That's a really powerful debuff. And yes, a lot of healers have this debuff with a certain armor type, but a lot of healers don't have access to that armor type in the beginning. So this is a good way for your group to have that uptime. Now you can apply this every 15 seconds. So it's pretty nice. Alright, and that is the CP, or the skills, guys. Now we're going to take a look at CP. And I'm going to go through this really fast. So starting with the red tree, and this is a basic layout. So if you want to change the layout, you can look around online, find other setups for CP that are going to be better for you. So this is 66 on Ironclad. This reduces your damage taken from direct damage attacks by 22%. Moving on, you have 31 into Thick Skin. This reduces damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. Hardy, 56, reduces your damage taken from physical, poison, and disease damage by 12%. And Elemental Defender, 56 points, reduces your damage taken from Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic damage. Now, you guys know that ability we use that gives us 8% damage reduction? That applies to Hardy and Elemental Defender because it reduces all incoming damage by 8%. So it applies to these two. So you actually get a 20% damage reduction with that. Now, damage over time effects are reduced by 13%. So that's 33% reduced effect. Direct damage is reduced by 22%. So that's 42% reduced direct damage. And this doesn't apply just to the damage reduction you have. You also have your resistances as well. So you actually get a lot of mitigation from these things. Moving on, we have 40 into Bastion. This increases effectiveness of your damage shields on you by 16.2%. Now, you guys are probably saying, why do you have this if you only use the one shield? It's for later on, if you decide you want to use Bone Shield in certain circumstances. And Bone Shield is something you unlock through the Undaunted line. If you use that, it's going to be a bigger shield for you. That means it's going to give you better ability to absorb damage. Next ability we have is Quick Recovery. This increases your healing received by 5%. And then we have 2 into Heavy Armor Focus. This is just to kind of balance out our heavy armor versus our spell resist versus our physical resist. Moving on over here, we have 40 into Warlord. This reduces our break free cost by 16%. We have 16 into Sprinter, reducing our sprint cost by 10%. 16 into Bashing Focus, reducing our bash cost by 10%. And then over here, we have 43 in Arcanus, increasing our magic recovery by 10%, and 75 in Tenacity, increasing our Magica stamina of our fully charged heavy attacks. Now, if you remember, I told you about the heavy armor passive that gives you the 25%, and then you get a baseline of 35. So that's 55%. This takes you up to 69%. Almost 70% cost reduction. Or 70% not cost reduction, but return of resources when you heavy attack. Moving on over here, we have 40 into Tumbling, reducing our dodge roll cost by 16%, and 40 into Shadow Word, reducing our block cost by another 16%. So, block cost, because of the way we have it set up, we get 36, 20, 8, so 36 plus 20 is 56. Then you add the 8 to it. That's 64. Then you add 16 to it. Guys got it? That's 80% block cost reduction. then you have a glyph on your jewelry that gives you even more block cost reduction. You got to remember, you have a 30k stamina. You're not going to run out of resources anytime soon if you know how to play a tank. Now, moving on to the next tree, the blue tree, we have 43 in a bless. This increases our healing done by 10%. Moving into the middle tree, we have 35 in a physical weapon expert. This increases light and heavy attack damage of our sword and shield and our bow. The next one we have is 40 in a master at arms. This increases our direct damage done by 16%. And what this allows us to do is get a few passive bonuses from this tree. It allows us to get retaliation. When you block a heavy attack, your next light attack used within 7 seconds deals 30% more damage. So that's 50% more damage your light attack's going to do. You also get reposit. When you block a melee attack, you have a 15% chance to deal X amount of damage. Physical damage to the enemy. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. And then we gain Butcher. This increases your damage of your light and heavy attacks by 5% when enemies drop below 20%. 25%. So let's say the enemy's below 25%, you block that attack. You get that 30% damage for 7 seconds on your next light attack. So you get 50 points, 50%, 75% more damage on the light attack. But it doesn't in there, because when you go over here and you look at the first one we have Mighty. This increases your physical poison and disease damage by 12%. So not only do you get 75, you go up to 87% more damage. Moving on over here, we have 40 in a thaumaturge, increasing your damage done with damage over time effects by 16%, and 56 into precise strikes, increasing your critical damage and healing done by 20%. This is really, really important. Alright guys, so now that I've shown you guys that, I'm going to show you guys this build in action. We are going to actually go to the Sunspire Keep dungeon or trial in the new Elsweyr area, and I'm going to show you guys this thing, how it works out in this trial. Now you got to remember, this is a starter build, so this is to help you get started in normal play and some veteran content in dungeons to help you start earning gear like monster sets and other gear sets that you can utilize in the game. So this is just going to show you how effective this build can be in this situation. Now, this isn't going to be what it's going to be like through the whole thing, because I'm not going to play through the whole thing with this character. It would take me forever to get to the first boss, because this guy does very little damage. But it depends on how you consider that damage, because like when you're playing in Overland, it does a decent amount. When you're playing in dungeons and trials, it does a decent amount. It doesn't do absurd damage. So, alright, one of the things you have to know about being a tank is priority targets. So in this situation, we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to use this to see how this works. So here we go. Enemies, hello, how are you guys? Let's go ahead and get our resistance buff. And then we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to put down our defensive thing. We're going to summon our skeleton that's going to heal us. We're going to go over here. We're going to block now, so you guys can see the stamina use. Then I'm going to use this ability, heal myself. And I'm just going to stand here. I'm going to use a potion to get some resources back. Now you can see how I'm losing a lot of resources. I'm going to let those two guys jump. I'm going to heavy attack and get some resources back. I'm going to use my scythe again. I'm going to go ahead and use... Oops, I missed it. We're going to go ahead and do this. Oops, I'm on my wrong ability. There we go. And as you can see, I can just stand here pretty much and just walk around. I don't even need to block, because this thing can mitigate so much damage. It's really not fun. because of all the damage reduction we have. And then the fact that we have healing, which allows this to self-absorb damage. So as you guys can see, I can absorb damage without needing to worry about too much. I do want to make sure I keep my abilities going though, so this way I can mitigate more damage from these guys. And then use my scythe to get my health back. Now in a group, we will have a healer and other stuff, and we can just sit here and pretty much do this all day long. And as long as you know how to, like, heavy attack and block attacks and everything, you can pretty much keep your resources up indefinitely with this thing. Because of the resource return that the Red Guard has on stuff. So you can stand here and just keep doing this. Blocking and tank. Now this is normal difficulty. Now I can come in here in veteran difficulty and do the same thing because these aren't really powerful mobs. But we're not going to get into that. This is to show that in normal mode this build is viable for this content. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it for this build, guys. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, you know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.